There are experiences that pierce through your soul and completely change the way you see the world around you. In the mountain ranges of North Carolina, specifically in the Blue Ridge regions and the eternal mists of the Great Smoky Mountains, thousands of tourists find peace, spiritual connection, and that renewing sensation of being amidst untouched nature. But I'll tell you something that no tourist brochures or travel magazines mention. There are portions of this wild territory where even the most experienced veterans keep their gaze fixed on the trail ahead, their breathing controlled, and their hand never too far from some form of protection. These are areas that the forest itself seems to reject, where sunlight penetrates differently, and where the silence carries a suffocating weight. When I received my assignment to that region, I believed it would be just another operational routine. The Department of Homeland Security needed a constant presence in those remote elevations, a pair of watchful eyes traversing the gorges and monitoring access routes. On paper, it was about ensuring the safety of travelers crossing the famous Blue Ridge Parkway, that scenic road that winds between the peaks. But there was another layer to that mission, aspects that never appeared in official documents, information deliberately buried in the deepest archives. And I can guarantee one thing with absolute certainty. In that first moment when I felt the presence, when my instinct screamed that something was wrong, I was fully convinced that I was completely alone on that isolated cliff. That conviction lasted exactly 3 seconds before I realized how terribly wrong I was. My name is Alan Whitehorse, I'm 36 years old, and I've carried the responsibility of the federal uniform for over a decade. I've served my country with absolute dedication, crossed hostile territories abroad where danger was constant and visible, and completed trainings that supposedly equipped me to handle practically any type of threat a man could face on this planet. At least that's what I believed with unshakable certainty. My Indigenous heritage, passed down through generations of my family, has always taught me to respect the land and understand its signs. I'm not the type of person who gets scared easily. My record and lineage prove that. However, these ancestral mountains have a unique ability to reveal to you how insignificant you really are in the face of forces you don't understand, forces that existed long before the first settlers arrived on these lands. I established my operational base working out of Asheville, North Carolina, a charming city nestled in the heart of the Appalachians. My orders seemed incredibly straightforward and devoid of complexity. Conduct regular patrols along the Blue Ridge Parkway, provide immediate response to any emerging emergencies, and maintain constant vigilance over the most isolated and inaccessible sections of Pisgah National Forest. For most federal agents, this type of assignment would be considered a quiet mission, almost a rest period compared to urban or border operations. But I learned quickly, in a brutal and unforgettable way, that these woods never stay silent for long. There's an energy here, something primitive that pulses through the roots of the trees and echoes through the deep valleys. I've spent countless nights under the imposing shadow of Cold Mountain, that sleeping giant dominating the horizon, where the mist descends the slopes like a living entity, a spectral veil moving with its own intent. The air at that specific altitude carries a particular density, saturated with the penetrating aroma of centuries-old pines mixed with damp earth, ancient moss, and something else I've never been able to fully identify. And the silence. Sometimes that silence takes on an oppressive, almost tangible quality, as if the forest itself is consciously holding its breath, waiting for something you can't see but feel watching your every move. It was during that particularly stifling summer, right in the middle of all that unnatural quiet, that something happened that no training manual, no field simulation, absolutely nothing in my military experience could have prepared me to face. Because I finally understood the disturbing truth that my ancestors always knew. The mountain wasn't just there, still and indifferent. The mountain was alive, aware, and watching me with predatory attention from the very first day. It all started on a night that should have been absolutely ordinary, with no noteworthy events. I was conducting a nighttime patrol near Looking Glass Rock, that massive and imposing rock formation rising from the heart of Pisgah Forest like a gigantic dome of polished granite. From the cliff where I positioned myself, I could see the moonlight spilling through the treetops that stretched infinitely, creating a silver sea against the deep dark green of the dense vegetation. I had traversed that specific path dozens of times over the previous months, knew every curve, every loose stone, every landmark tree. But on that particular night, something fundamental changed in the atmosphere around me. The forest acquired an excessive, unnatural stillness. The crickets that normally filled the night with their constant and comforting symphony simply ceased their songs abruptly. as if someone had pressed a mute button. The owls that usually vocalized their territorial presences, the constant rustling of small nocturnal animals crossing the underbrush, the habitual movement of wildlife, all of it disappeared completely, sucked into a vacuum of absolute silence. All that remained was the rhythmic sound of my own military boots against the compacted earth of the trail, and my breathing echoing amplified within my own ears, each inhalation seeming obscenely loud in that dead silence. Anyone who spends significant time in wild environments far from civilization quickly learns to recognize the signs. A silence of that magnitude and quality means one of two well-defined possibilities. A large predator is in the immediate vicinity, and all the smaller creatures have hidden to preserve their lives, or something completely different is present, something that nature itself recognizes as wrong, as a violation of natural laws. I raised my night vision binoculars, those state-of-the-art military devices that transform complete darkness into ghostly shades of green, and began methodically scanning the tree line ahead. Initially, I couldn't distinguish anything beyond dense overlapping shadows, intertwined branches creating complex patterns of darkness. Then I noticed the movement, a subtle alteration in the configuration of the shadows, slowly, extremely deliberate, devoid of any urgency or hesitation. And there it was, materialized as if it had condensed from the darkness itself. A tall silhouette, abnormally tall, positioned in absolute stillness at the edge of the dense vegetation, as if it had been waiting patiently, perhaps for hours, waiting precisely for the moment when I would direct my gaze in that exact direction. It definitely wasn't a black bear, those we occasionally encounter in these mountains. It also didn't have the shape or proportions of an ordinary human being. Its upper limbs seemed extended too far in relation to the torso, creating a silhouette that violated the proportions our brain instinctively recognizes as correct. The shoulders were narrow in an inadequate way, and the entire body seemed stretched vertically, elongated in ways that made my stomach contract in instinctive repulsion. For a brief moment, I tried to convince myself it was just a trick of the nighttime lighting, that my brain was trying to force that disturbing image to fit into some familiar and safe category of known things. But then it moved its head, tilting it to the side at an angle no human could achieve without breaking their neck bones. The movement was fluid, continuous, completely surpassing normal anatomical limits. And then, as my heart raced in my chest and cold sweat began to beat on my forehead despite the chilly mountain air, that thing simply disappeared. It didn't run. It didn't turn. It just ceased to be there, as if it had been absorbed back into the shadows that generated it. A few minutes later, while still processing what I had just witnessed, my radio crackled with static interference before an urgent transmission cut through the night. There was a situation developing in the Shining Rock Wilderness, that particularly remote wild area. Two experienced hikers, identified as Christopher and Jennifer Patterson, brother and sister aged 28 and 25 respectively, had disappeared without a trace. The last time anyone saw them was when they started a trail toward the cold mountain region, an area known for its brutal beauty and extreme isolation. The local sheriff's office was requesting federal support due to what they had located at the Pattersons' last known campsite. The preliminary report used only the expression, unusual evidence, to describe the scene. I had no idea at that moment how carefully those specific words had been chosen, how much disturbing information was deliberately hidden behind that vague and sanitized description. I drove immediately to the ranger station, where the search operation was being organized and coordinated. Sheriff Thomas Garrett was already on site when I arrived. He was a man who had spent his entire existence in these mountains, knew every trail and every local legend. Tough, practical, extremely skeptical of fantastical stories, definitely not someone who got rattled easily. But I could clearly see in his eyes, in the way he avoided direct eye contact, in the tension of his jaw, that something he had witnessed at the scene had left him deeply disturbed in a way his decades of experience couldn't explain. With him was Nathan Proudfoot, a 42-year-old Cherokee tracker from the nearby reservation in Cherokee, North Carolina. Nathan wasn't the talkative type. He rarely wasted words on unnecessary explanations. He didn't need to. His mere presence carried a specific weight, a silent authority, as if he possessed knowledge about these lands that the rest of us would never reach, even after living here for decades. There was something in the way he observed the surrounding forest, the way his eyes moved constantly, always vigilant, always assessing. The last member of our search team was Agent Rachel Torres, 29 years old, a relatively new recruit sent directly from Washington, D.C. She was intelligent, ambitious, extremely confident in her modern investigation methods, and notably quick to dismiss any local folklore as primitive superstition from backwoods people. She smiled in a way that made it clear she was tolerating us, humoring us, treating our concerns as exaggerations from people who had spent too much time isolated in the mountains. Together, we set out for the Shining Rock Wilderness as the sun began its descent toward the horizon, and I kept repeating to myself, trying to convince myself that it would be just a standard search and rescue operation, nothing more. We would probably find the Pattersons disoriented but alive, perhaps with some minor injuries. But deep down, in some primitive part of my consciousness that was still connected to ancestral instincts, I knew better. I knew something was terribly wrong, because the mountain had other plans for us, and I was about to discover exactly what it meant to challenge territory that never belonged to us. When we finally reached the location of the Pattersons' last known campsite, the sun was already low in the sky, casting that characteristic orange light of late afternoon that made the trees look like they were on fire. The air grew denser with every step we took, and I swear I felt the forest watching us as we advanced along the narrow trail. We found the campsite situated in a small clearing near Cold Mountain. The instant I stepped into that space, my chest tightened. Something was completely out of place. The tent was sagging to one side, half collapsed, as if someone had left in a hurry without looking back. The backpacks were scattered on the dirt ground, one of them torn with clothes spilling out. An aluminum pot was tipped over, dented as if it had been kicked hard. But the strangest thing was the campfire. Someone had built a perfect circle of stones, stacked dry firewood in the center, everything meticulously prepared to be lit. But it never was. It was as if they were seconds away from lighting the fire when something interrupted them abruptly. Sheriff Garrett walked the edge of the clearing in total silence, his face closed off. Nathan was crouched, running his fingers over the dirt, studying something only he could interpret. Rachel shook her head, muttering something about bears or perhaps a sudden storm that scared them. But I knew storms didn't do this. Storms didn't create that feeling of dread that stuck to your skin. That's when I saw something half buried in the soil. A scratched and battered Polaroid camera, but still intact. Curiosity got the better of me. I pressed the button, and the photos began to slide out slowly, the paper cold against my palm. At first, it seemed like just a blur, indistinct shadows among the trees. I almost convinced myself it was just a poorly taken photo, bad exposure. But as the image became clearer, the blur took shape, and there it was, in the background of the photograph, a figure standing among the trunks. Too tall, narrow shoulders, limbs unnaturally elongated, the head tilted as if it already knew we would be looking at it in that future moment. When I turned the photo to show the others, the temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees instantly. Nathan held his breath. Rachel paled. Even Sheriff Garrett took an involuntary step back. In the moment I held that photo in the air, the atmosphere in the clearing changed completely. We weren't alone. We continued following the faint trail leading out of the campsite. Nathan moved ahead of the group, his eyes sharp, his steps calculated, but his silence weighed more than any words could. The trail curved south, leading us toward Graveyard Fields, that valley known for its waterfalls and open fields. But it also had another reputation. Locals whispered that the soil there was cursed, that the trees never grew right, that something had happened in that place a long time ago. The ground began to soften under our boots. That's when Nathan stopped abruptly. He didn't say anything. He just pointed. I approached and saw footprints, but they weren't human, not even close. They were long, each impression stretched as if the foot had too many toes. The arch was completely wrong, the heel raised too high, as if whatever made them walked only on tiptoes. And the spacing between one footprint and the next was immense. Whatever left those tracks covered more distance in a single stride than any of us could. Rachel forced a laugh, but her voice trembled. "It's a prank. Someone carved this here to scare tourists." Nathan shook his head without taking his eyes off the ground. His voice came out low and firm. "Not a prank, and not human." A chill ran down my spine as I stared at those marks. Because in that instant, I understood something I hadn't before. We weren't tracking the missing hikers anymore. Something was tracking us. By late afternoon, we had crossed the ridge and were approaching Black Balsam Knob. The trail narrowed, trees pressing in from both sides, their shadows stretching far more than they should in the remaining light. That's when we saw it. At first, I thought it was a trick of the sun filtering through the branches, but as I got closer, the air left my lungs. There was a body hanging from a tree. It was Jennifer Patterson. Her arms were bent at angles no human body should be able to bend, like a broken doll someone had deliberately placed there. Her clothes were intact. No signs of struggle, no blood, no rope, nothing to explain how she got there. Her eyes were wide open, fixed on us, empty of any life. Rachel turned and started vomiting. Sheriff Garrett let out a low curse. Nathan just stood there, jaw locked, fists clenched. Rachel finally exploded. "We need to get out of here now. This isn't natural. It's not safe." I shook my head. "Her brother is still out here somewhere. We can't just abandon him." Nathan's voice came out grave. "We keep looking." The sheriff looked torn, but the truth was obvious. Daylight was gone, and we wouldn't make it back before total darkness. We had no choice but to stay. We set up camp on a flat piece of land not far from there. Sheriff Garrett ordered no fire. He said it was for safety, but I knew the truth. He was afraid of what the light might attract. The forest closed in around us, denser than ever. Every sound seemed amplified, every silence heavier. I sat with my back against my backpack, flashlight firmly gripped, and that's when I saw it. A figure standing just beyond the reach of my light. The forest never truly sleeps, but that night it seemed like it was holding its breath. The silence was denser than anything I'd ever experienced. Then the shadows began to move. At first it was just the sway of branches. Then came the sound of leaves being crushed, soft but deliberate, circling our position. My pulse hammered in my ears like a war drum. Whispers floated through the darkness, low, overlapping, like voices speaking in a language older than the trees around us. The words made no logical sense, but the meaning was crystal clear. We didn't belong there. Rachel stiffened her entire body. "Are you hearing that?" Her voice cracked, and then she screamed. Her body was yanked backward violently, swallowed by the darkness in a second. One moment she was there, the next her hands were clawing at the dirt desperately as something dragged her into the trees. I lunged after her, Nathan at my side. The beam of my flashlight caught a flash of movement, and for the first time, I saw it clearly. Its skin was grayish, stretched too tight over the bone structure, almost translucent under the light. The limbs were too long, the fingers ending in sharp points that scraped the ground as it moved. And the eyes weren't really eyes. They were black voids, emptier than the night itself. I raised my gun and fired. The sound of the shot tore through the forest. The thing shuddered but didn't fall. It turned its head toward me slowly and deliberately, as if it wanted me to see it was unharmed. Nathan fired too, but it was useless. Rachel was still screaming, kicking, fighting against the ground as she was dragged farther and farther. We ran after, crashing through the underbrush, but the truth hit me with every step. It wasn't chasing us. It was leading us somewhere, and I knew we wouldn't like the destination. We ran until our lungs burned, the forest blurring past us in streaks of black and gray. Branches tore at our arms, roots tried to trip us, but we kept running, chasing Rachel's increasingly faint screams. And then, through the trees, I saw a tilted, weathered structure, half swallowed by the woods. An old Forest Service ranger station, abandoned for decades. Nathan shoved the door hard, the wood groaning as if it hadn't been touched in years. We stumbled inside, dragging Rachel with us, and slammed the door shut. Sheriff Garrett slid the rusty bolt into place with trembling hands. For a moment, all we could hear was our own ragged, desperate breathing. Then it came. The scratching. Slow, deliberate. Long claws scraping on the wood inches from where we were. Each scratch made the walls tremble. I pressed my back against the door, my heart thundering. The air inside the cabin was heavy, damp with rot, as if the place was holding its breath with us. The whispers returned, not faint this time, louder, clearer, coiling through the cracks in the walls. Voices speaking in that language I didn't know, but which pressed against my chest, filling me with dread. And then something changed drastically. The whispers transformed. They weren't the creatures anymore. They were stronger, firmer, older. Cherokee words rolled through the night, deep and rhythmic, as if the forest itself had begun to sing. The scratching stopped. The thing outside let out a moan, a hollow sound that shook the ground under our feet. Then silence. It was gone, forced back into the woods by something older than itself, something that wasn't with us, but also wasn't against us. We stayed frozen for hours, staring at the door, waiting for it to return. And when the singing finally faded, I looked down. The claw marks were still there, carved deep into the wood, proof that we hadn't imagined anything. The whispers disappeared, but the claw marks on the door proved everything was real. Morning came gray and empty. The forest outside seemed unchanged, as if nothing had happened. But we knew the truth. We searched for days after that, combing every ridge, every trail. We never found Christopher Patterson. No footprints, no scraps of clothing, nothing. He had been taken like so many others before him. Rachel never recovered. Within weeks, she resigned from Homeland Security and left North Carolina. Last I heard, she went west, to somewhere far from mountains and forests. Sheriff Garrett stayed in Asheville for a while, but retired much earlier than anyone expected. He never set foot near Shining Rock again. Nathan didn't say a word about what happened to anyone. He went back to his people, deeper into Cherokee territory, where the land is denser, older, and stayed there. And I'm still here. I walk these mountains, patrol these ridges, carrying the truth I wish I didn't know. Some parts of the Blue Ridge don't belong to us. They never did. The land has guardians, and not all of them are kind. So listen to me well when I say this. If you're going to hike here thinking your GPS will save you, thinking your modern gear makes you safe, remember this. The mountains were here before us, they'll be here long after us, and some things out here are watching, always watching.